The tribal officers served her at the front door, and her hands started shaking. The morning the HOA tore down my grandfather's cedar gate, they thought they were expanding a road. What they were really doing was pushing a quiet rancher into making a decision that would change ownership of the entire valley around them. I stood there watching dust roll across my pasture, while the HOA president smiled like she'd already won. She had no idea I was about to sell 1,900 acres, including the only road into her subdivision. And by the time she figured it out, the papers were already signed. If you like stories about land, law, quiet people pushed too far, and the kind of justice that doesn't need shouting, stick around and subscribe. These roads always lead somewhere interesting. I woke up at 5:11 that morning to the sound of chainsaws. Not one chainsaw, 3 of them. The noise rolled across the pasture like a swarm of angry hornets, mixed with diesel engines and the metallic crash of heavy equipment rattling over gravel. For a second, lying there in the dark, I thought maybe one of my cattle trailers had broken loose in the wind. Then I saw headlights moving outside my bedroom window. I threw on my jeans and stepped onto the porch barefoot. Cold Montana dirt pressed against my feet while the smell of fresh-cut cedar hit me hard enough to stop me in place. My grandfather's gate was coming apart. 2 contractors in orange safety vests had chains wrapped around the cedar posts, while an excavator yanked them sideways out of the ground. One of the posts cracked with a sharp gunshot sound before collapsing into the dust. That gate had stood there since 1952. My grandfather built it himself after coming home from Korea. Hand-carved cedar, iron hinges forged by a blacksmith in Livingston. My father used to repaint the branding mark every spring while I held the lantern beside him. Now pieces of it were scattered across my driveway like firewood. Down by the road, a white Range Rover sat idling beside the cattle guard. Vanessa Holloway leaned against the hood wearing sunglasses even though the sun hadn't fully cleared the hills yet. Perfect white vest. Designer boots that had never touched real mud in their lives. Coffee cup steaming in her hand. Behind her, another crew was widening the gravel road with a grader. Dirt rolled off the blade in thick waves. I heard boots hit the porch behind me. Luke, my son, stopped beside me wearing jeans and a gray thermal shirt, his jaw tightening the second he saw the machinery. "What the hell is this?" Nobody answered him. One of the contractors backed the excavator up while another fed a chain around the remaining gatepost. Vanessa finally looked up at us. No guilt, no hesitation, just annoyance like we were interrupting her schedule. She raised her coffee cup slightly toward the crew. "Take the whole thing out," she called. "The road needs another 6 feet if emergency vehicles are going to pass safely." Luke stepped off the porch immediately. "Dad." His voice carried that dangerous tone I remembered from when he came home from wildfire deployments, too wired to sleep. The tone that meant somebody was about to get hurt. I put one hand on his arm before he made it halfway down the steps. "Easy, easy," he snapped. "She's destroying our property." The excavator pulled again. The second cedar post ripped free from the ground. Dust exploded across the pasture. One of my horses spooked near the fence line and bolted toward the creek. Vanessa finally walked closer, heels crunching across gravel. She stopped directly beside the broken gate like she was posing for a magazine cover. "This road belongs to the community now," she said calmly. Bitter Creek Estates voted last month to approve the expansion. I looked past her toward the subdivision sitting above my ranch. 92 expensive homes tucked against the hills overlooking Mercer Lake. Steel roofs catching sunrise light. Luxury mountain cabins built by people who wanted the fantasy of ranch life without understanding what land actually was. 14 years ago, when the first developer came here, he asked permission before crossing my property. Vanessa never asked permission for anything. Luke took another step forward. "You don't own this road." Vanessa smiled without looking at him. We've maintained it for years. The HOA attorney says we have every legal right to improve access infrastructure. Infrastructure. That was the word she used for my grandfather's gate. One of the contractors killed his chainsaw and glanced nervously between us. Even he looked uncomfortable standing there, beside splintered cedar beams older than everyone present. Vanessa turned back toward me. You should really consider cooperating, Ethan. Property values are rising out here. Progress is happening whether you like it or not. Progress. I stared at the broken cedar lying in the dirt, then at the grader chewing deeper into my ranch road, then at the fresh survey stakes someone had planted along the fence line sometime during the night. That caught my attention. Survey stakes, not random construction. Planning. Legal planning. Luke was still breathing hard beside me. Dad, say something. I did, quietly. She just made the biggest mistake of her life. Vanessa laughed once under her breath, like I'd confirmed exactly what she already believed about me. A stubborn old rancher too slow to stop what was coming. She turned around and walked back toward her SUV, while the construction crews kept tearing apart the entrance to my land. I watched her drive away through the dust cloud. Then I noticed something else. The grader had cut directly across the old iron boundary marker near the cattle guard. Half of it was now buried under fresh gravel. That marker had been placed there in 1948 by the county survey office. I knew because my father helped pour the concrete around it. And suddenly, standing there in the dust beside the wreckage of my grandfather's gate, I realized Vanessa Holloway had no idea what she had actually touched. Luke looked at me again. You're way too calm right now. Maybe I was. Or maybe after 58 years on this land, I'd learned something men like Vanessa's lawyers never understood. Real power never shouts first. It waits. And somewhere behind the widening road, beyond the ridge above Mercer Lake, an idea had already started forming in my head. One that was going to change ownership of everything they thought they controlled. By noon, Bitter Creek Estates had turned my ranch entrance into a construction zone. Pickup trucks rolled in and out like they owned the place. HOA residents slowed beside the torn-up gate just long enough to stare before driving through without waving. One woman in a silver Audi nearly clipped one of my fence posts because she was filming the roadwork on her phone. Luke leaned against the barn fence, watching another load of gravel dump across my property.
You gonna stop this?
No, I said. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Dad, they buried the county marker. I noticed. That's illegal. Very. The grader operator pushed another wave of dirt across the shoulder. Fresh white survey stakes lined both sides of the road now, stretching almost a quarter-mile toward the subdivision entrance. That bothered me more than the gate. Survey crews meant lawyers were already involved. Vanessa wasn't acting impulsively. She thought she had legal cover. Around 2 that afternoon, I drove into Livingston. The old county records building sat behind the courthouse beside a row of dead cottonwoods and rusted parking meters. Inside, the air smelled like mildew, printer toner, and old paper. Mara Quinn was already waiting at a wooden table, stacked with plat maps and title binders. Mara had the kind of face people underestimated right before losing to her in court. Sharp eyes. Gray wool coat. No wasted words. She slid a folder toward me. You weren't exaggerating. I usually don't. Luke pulled up a chair beside me while Mara opened the file. Bitter Creek Estates never recorded a permanent easement, she said. Not once. She laid out 3 documents in front of us. Original subdivision plat, county access review, road maintenance agreement. Every single one. Stopped short of granting ownership over Mercer Road. Luke frowned. Then how the hell are they claiming it's theirs? Mara flipped open another folder. Prescriptive easement. I already knew the phrase before she said it. Use a road openly long enough, continuously enough, and eventually some people start pretending usage equals ownership. Luke rubbed his jaw. Can they actually do that? Not if the use was permitted, Mara replied. Then she handed me the paper that made me smile for the first time all day. An old check stub. Bitter Creek Estates HOA. Year, 2012. Memo line. Courtesy road access payment. Mara slid another one over, then another, then a stack. 14 years worth. Every January, the HOA had mailed me a check for road maintenance and permissive access. Small amounts. $1,500 at first, then $2,000 after the subdivision expanded. Nothing huge. But legally, those checks were dynamite. Luke stared down at the pile. So they knew. Oh, they absolutely knew, Mara said. She opened a final folder. Inside were scanned letters from previous HOA boards thanking me for continued gracious road accommodation. Not public access, not community ownership. Accommodation, permission. Vanessa Holloway's entire legal argument collapsed the second those records hit a courtroom. Luke let out a low whistle. So why'd she do it? Mara answered before I could. Because somebody told her possession creates leverage. She tapped the fresh survey photos I'd taken that morning. She's building a visual case. Wider road, permanent improvements, public usage. She wants this to look irreversible before filing. And she's filing? I asked. Mara nodded once. My guess? Within 72 hours. Luke looked at me. You don't seem worried. I leaned back in the chair and looked through the courthouse window toward the ridge above town. No, I said quietly. Actually, I hope she does. Both of them looked at me. Mara narrowed her eyes first. You already have something in mind. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached for another document sitting near the bottom of the pile. An old county land survey. One most people would have ignored. But not me, because Mercer Road wasn't the valuable part of my property. The land surrounding it was, and the subdivision only had one way in or out. Luke finally broke the silence. Dad, what are you planning? I folded the survey carefully and slid it into my jacket pocket. Then I stood up. Right now, I said, I'm planning to let Vanessa Holloway feel very confident. Outside, late sunlight cut across the courthouse steps as we walked toward my truck. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered. A man's voice introduced himself as legal counsel for Bitter Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Professional, calm, expensive. He informed me the HOA intended to file for immediate injunctive relief regarding obstruction risks and access expansion rights. Exactly like Mara predicted. I listened quietly until he finished. Then I said, Tell Vanessa I received the message. That's all? For now. I hung up. Luke shook his head once we climbed into the truck. You're enjoying this? No, I said. I looked back toward the valley road leading home. Toward the widening gravel path they thought they were stealing. I'm waiting, because somewhere between the destroyed gate, the buried boundary marker, and 14 years of signed courtesy payments, Vanessa Holloway had already walked into a fight she didn't understand yet. And if she pushed this into court, she was going to hand me exactly what I needed next. 3 days later, Vanessa Holloway turned my ranch into a billboard. By sunrise, the old cedar gate was completely gone. In its place stood temporary steel barricades and 2 oversized signs planted beside the road. Welcome to Holloway Pass Parkway, private mountain community access. My property line sat less than 20 feet behind them. Luke read the signs twice before laughing under his breath. She actually named your road after herself. Her husband, I corrected. At the bottom corner, smaller gold lettering read, a Holloway development community. That explained part of it. Vanessa wasn't just trying to control access anymore. She was increasing property value. Branding the road made the subdivision feel permanent, exclusive, expensive. The legal paperwork hadn't even been filed yet, and she was already selling ownership she didn't have. Around noon, Mara called. They filed. County court? First thing this morning. Emergency motion for declaratory easement rights and infrastructure protection. I leaned against the barn fence watching 2 SUVs speed, through the new entrance signs without slowing for my cattle crossing. Any surprises? Actually, yes. Mara paused. They attached photographs. What kind? Construction upgrades, community use, public necessity. Her voice hardened slightly. They're building a narrative that the road has effectively become public access. Luke overheard enough to mutter. Unbelievable, Mara continued. They also included sworn statements claiming the HOA has maintained and improved the road independently for years. That made me smile again, because every improvement invoice they'd submitted could be traced directly back to those courtesy agreements. They were unknowingly proving permissive use with every page. Still, Vanessa wasn't slowing down. That Saturday evening, Luke and I drove into town for the annual Livingston Ranch Equipment Auction. Half the county was there. Ranchers, contractors, outfitters, retirees. Folding chairs packed shoulder to shoulder beneath fluorescent lights while diesel generators hummed outside. The second we walked in, conversations dipped. News traveled fast in Montana, especially land disputes. Vanessa stood near the coffee table beside her husband, Tessa Holloway. He wore pressed jeans and a tailored vest that cost more than my first pickup truck. Real estate developer smile. Handshake politician energy. Vanessa noticed us immediately. "Oh, good," she said, loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. The Mercers finally decided to join civilization. Luke stiffened beside me. I ignored her and kept walking toward the auction seating. That should've ended it. Instead, Vanessa followed. "You know, Ethan," she continued, "most people your age eventually realize they can't stop progress forever." Nobody around us spoke. An old rancher near the back quietly lowered his auction paddle. Vanessa took another sip from her paper cup. "Honestly, Bitter Creek Estates has done more for this valley in 10 years than your cattle operation has done in 50. Luke turned around. "Careful." Vanessa smiled at him. "Oh, I forgot. The wildfire hero." She looked Luke up and down. "Must be hard watching your father cling to a dying cowboy fantasy." Tessa finally touched her elbow lightly. "Vanessa," but she kept going. "Maybe if Ethan had spent less time hiding on that ranch and more time adapting after Claire died, he wouldn't be fighting everybody now." The room went dead silent. Luke moved before I could grab him. Sheriff Dale Rooker intercepted him halfway across the aisle. The sheriff caught Luke by the shoulder with one hand. "That's enough." Luke's jaw flexed hard. "You hear what she just said?" "Yeah," Dale answered quietly. "Everybody did." Vanessa suddenly realized she'd pushed too far. I saw it in the way her posture shifted. Not guilt, calculation. She glanced around the room and understood nobody was smiling anymore. Not even her husband. I stepped forward before Luke could say another word. "Come on," I told him. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it." Vanessa crossed her arms. "You don't have anything to say?" I looked directly at her for the first time all evening. My wife spent her last summer sitting beside Mercer Lake, watching elk cross those hills at sunrise. The room stayed perfectly still. She understood something you never will. Vanessa opened her mouth. I didn't let her speak. "You think land belongs to whoever talks the loudest about it." Then I turned and walked out. Luke followed me into the gravel parking lot, still furious. "You should've buried her in there." "No, she insulted Mom." I unlocked the truck. "And now everybody in Livingston knows exactly who she is." That mattered more, because public opinion in a small county moves quietly at first, then all at once. Back at the ranch that night, I walked alone down to the old fishing dock Claire loved. The lake water was black beneath the moonlight. Fence wire rattled softly uphill where the road crews had widened the shoulder too close to my pasture. Luke came down carrying 2 beers. He handed me one. "You keep saying you're waiting," he said. "Waiting for what?" I stared across the water toward the subdivision lights glowing on the ridge. For the first time, I could see the shape of what needed to happen. Not a lawsuit, not revenge, something permanent. "Because loud men lose focus," I said quietly. Luke shook his head. That sounds like something Grandpa used to say. He was usually right. Above us, headlights moved slowly along Holloway Pass Parkway. My road, their confidence. And somewhere beyond those hills, someone else was about to become very interested in owning exactly the land Vanessa thought she had already taken. I left before sunrise the next morning. Luke noticed the trailer hitch rattling behind my truck while I loaded paperwork into the cab. Where you headed? West. That's not an answer. It's enough of one. He watched me slide the old survey tubes behind the seat. You meeting Mara? No. That got his attention. Because outside of court filings and county records, there weren't many people left connected to this land issue. At least not people Luke knew about. The drive took nearly 3 hours through winding mountain roads and pine valleys before I finally crossed onto tribal land near Flathead Lake. The road signs changed first, then the fences, then the feeling. Some places know exactly who they are. The office I pulled into sat beside an old restored trading post built from dark timber and river stone. A bronze plaque outside read, Red Elk Land and Water Conservancy. Naomi Red Elk met me at the door before I even knocked. Mid-40s, calm eyes, work boots, denim jacket dusted with dirt from field inspections. Not a politician, not a fundraiser. Someone who actually walked the land she protected. She shook my hand once. Ethan Mercer. Naomi. You brought maps? I brought better than maps. Inside, the conference table was already covered with watershed diagrams, wildlife corridor reports, and federal conservation overlays. They'd been studying Mercer Valley long before Vanessa Holloway ever planted a sign there. Naomi rolled out a topographic map. Your ranch sits between 2 protected migration corridors, she said. The lake access, creek system, and western timber ridge connect nearly 19,000 acres of uninterrupted habitat. I nodded once. I know. And the subdivision? Built right in the middle of the only road. She looked up at me carefully then. Your call sounded urgent. It is. I opened the survey tube and spread my own documents across the table. Original deeds, boundary surveys, road plats, tax records, then finally the easement file. Or more accurately, the lack of one. Naomi studied the documents for almost 2 minutes without speaking. Then she leaned back slightly. They never secured legal access. No, and they widened the road anyway this week. Her expression tightened. That's reckless. It's expensive reckless, I corrected. Which usually means somebody believes they're protected. Naomi looked toward the map again. The Conservancy's been trying to acquire connected acreage around Mercer Lake for years. Federal restoration money finally cleared 6 months ago. I heard we need roughly 1,500 acres minimum. You'd get 1,900. That finally silenced her. Outside the office window, trucks rolled past carrying timber down the highway. Naomi folded her hands together slowly. You're serious? Yes. You'd sell the ranch? Most of it. She stared at me hard enough to measure whether emotion or anger was driving this decision. It wasn't either. That seemed to surprise her more. I'd keep the cabin, barn, and lower pasture, I said. Everything else becomes protected conservation land. And the road? There's only one legal entrance into Bitter Creek Estates. Naomi understood immediately. I saw it happen in her eyes. The road wasn't the property. The road was leverage. You're talking about transferring control of the subdivision's only access point to a protected land trust. I'm talking about ownership. The room went quiet. Finally, Naomi stood and walked toward the window, overlooking the mountains. When did you decide this? The morning they tore down my grandfather's gate. She nodded once like that answer made perfect sense. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Why now, Ethan? I looked down at the map spread across the table. The widened road, the creek, the pasture lines, the luxury homes crowding land they treated like scenery instead of responsibility. Because some people need to learn roads aren't ownership. Naomi smiled faintly at that. Not amusement, recognition. She sat back down and opened a legal pad. If we move forward, this won't stay quiet forever. It only needs to stay quiet long enough. And your HOA president? Vanessa Holloway. Naomi wrote the name down. She'll fight. Yes. Court? Probably. Naomi capped her pen slowly. Well, she said, then I suppose we should make sure we own the road before she realizes the fight changed. That afternoon, we walked the ridge overlooking Mercer Lake with two land use analysts from the Conservancy. They photographed water access points, grazing corridors, and creek restoration zones, while I pointed out old fence lines and buried utility easements. Nobody mentioned the subdivision directly. They didn't need to. Every road in Bitter Creek Estates eventually narrowed into one unavoidable truth: my land. By the time I drove home after dark, Luke was sitting on the porch waiting. You were gone 12 hours. Long meeting. With who? I killed the engine and looked toward the distant subdivision lights glowing above the ridge. Then I handed him a folded copy of the original Mercer Valley survey map. Luke studied it for a moment before his eyes narrowed. Dad, don't ask questions yet. He looked back toward Holloway Pass Parkway, then back at me, and for the first time since Vanessa tore down the gate, I watched realization begin settling into his face. Not about revenge, about scale. Because if this worked, Vanessa Holloway wasn't about to lose an argument. She was about to lose control of the land underneath her entire subdivision. The problem was, she still thought she was winning. By Monday morning, Holloway Pass Parkway had become a full-blown construction corridor. Fresh gravel stretched nearly half a mile across my property, and crews were installing drainage culverts beside the widened shoulders without a single county permit posted anywhere. Vanessa even added decorative lantern posts near the subdivision entrance, like she was landscaping a resort. Luke stood beside me, near the cattle guard, watching another cement truck rumble uphill. She's spending serious money. Not hers, I said. That was the important part. Developers gamble differently when they think future buyers will cover today's mistakes. At 10:30, Mara Quinn called. You need to come into town. Bad? Depends how much you enjoy being sued. 20 minutes later, I was standing inside the Wallowa County Courthouse, holding a stack of papers nearly an inch thick. Bitter Creek Estates HO, Motion for Emergency Access Protection Vanessa, hadn't filed a simple easement claim. She'd gone bigger. According to the filing, I was now allegedly threatening public safety by interfering with emergency vehicle access to the subdivision. The HOA requested immediate court recognition of permanent roadway rights, plus protection from what they called future retaliatory obstruction. Luke read over my shoulder. Retaliatory obstruction? He repeated. You haven't done anything. Exactly, Mara said. She spread photographs across the conference table crews. Widening the road, residents driving through, children riding bikes near the subdivision entrance. Vanessa standing beside the new sign, smiling like a campaign ad. They're building emotional optics, Mara explained. Community dependence, family safety, public necessity. Then she slid another document toward me. Proposed future development plans, luxury ridge lots, private lake view cabins, projected property values. Every single proposal depended on permanent use of Mercer Road. Luke let out a sharp laugh. They're already selling expansion lots, Mara nodded. Tessa Holloway's development company started advertising them online. Friday. I studied the brochure carefully. Guaranteed private mountain access. That line appeared 3 separate times. Legally speaking, it was catastrophic, because nobody guarantees access rights they haven't secured, unless they're either reckless or desperate. Mara leaned closer. You understand what this means? Yes. They've financially tied the subdivision's future to land they don't own. Luke looked between us. That's good for us? It's dangerous for them, I answered. Outside the courthouse window, I could hear traffic rolling through town while Mara organized the response filings. We'll counter with the courtesy agreements first, she said. That kills prescriptive easement immediately. No. Both of them looked at me. Mara frowned slightly. You don't want to use them yet? Not immediately. Why? Because every day Vanessa kept building, advertising, and expanding her claims without ownership made the eventual collapse worse. I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I asked, how fast can they force hearings? 2 weeks, maybe. Faster if the judge gets nervous about emergency access. That's enough time. Mara studied me carefully again. You're awfully calm for a man being dragged into county court. Court isn't the problem. Luke crossed his arms. Then what is? I looked at the subdivision map hanging on the wall. 92 homes, 1 road, no alternative exit, and now future investors involved. Momentum, I said quietly. That afternoon, surveyors appeared along the western ridge above Mercer Lake. Not county crews, private crews. Naomi's people. They worked quietly, placing temporary orange markers near the timberline while drones mapped creek access and wildlife corridors across the ranch. Vanessa noticed almost immediately. Her Range Rover came flying down the gravel road, hard enough to spray rocks against my fence posts. She stepped out before the engine stopped running. What the hell are those people doing on your property? I closed the tailgate of my truck slowly. Survey work. For what? Land management. Her eyes narrowed behind oversized sunglasses. You planning to subdivide now? Interesting. That possibility genuinely worried her. No. Then why are there drones flying over the ridge? Because I allowed them. Vanessa took another step closer. This lawsuit becomes very ugly for you if you start interfering with subdivision operations. I almost smiled. Subdivision operations. Like she already owned the valley. Then she pointed toward the orange survey flags climbing the hills behind my lake. You trying to intimidate people? No. Then what are you doing? For a second, I considered telling her. Not everything, just enough. Just enough to make her nervous. Instead, I looked past her SUV toward Holloway Pass Parkway, stretching across my ranch like it belonged there. You'll know soon enough. Vanessa stared at me another long moment before climbing back into the Range Rover. But this time, when she drove away, she looked up toward the survey crews twice before disappearing uphill. Good, because somewhere between the lawsuit, the development brochures, and the survey stakes, now spreading across Mercer Valley, the ground underneath Bitter Creek Estates had already started shifting. Vanessa just couldn't feel it yet. The next 6 weeks became strangely quiet, not peaceful. Quiet the way a forest gets quiet before wildfire changes direction. Vanessa mistook that silence for surrender almost immediately. Her construction crews stopped working overtime. The emergency motions slowed down. Bitter Creek residents started jogging along Holloway Pass Parkway like it had always belonged to them. Somebody even installed decorative mailbox stones near the subdivision entrance. Every morning, traffic rolled across my ranch without hesitation, and every morning I documented it. New cameras went up along the road beneath the excuse of monitoring cattle movement. Luke mounted 2 near the creek crossing, and another beside the buried county marker the graders had half covered in gravel. Time-stamped footage, license plates, construction deliveries, commercial traffic tied to future lot development. Mara said the recordings were becoming very valuable. That usually meant somebody else was becoming very vulnerable. Meanwhile, Vanessa leaned harder into performance. Twice a week, she filmed social media videos standing beside Mercer Lake talking about preserving Montana mountain living. She smiled into her phone while luxury contractors drove across land she still didn't own behind her. One afternoon, Luke tossed his tablet onto the kitchen table. You need to see this. Vanessa appeared on screen wearing sunglasses and a cream-colored vest beside the widened road. Bitter Creek Estates continues improving access and infrastructure for our growing community, she said cheerfully. Despite resistance from certain outdated landowners. Luke paused the video. She's calling you outdated now. She's nervous. You think she's over-explaining? That was something my father used to say about liars. Truth usually arrives in fewer words. 3 days later, Naomi Red Elk came to the ranch with 2 federal conservation consultants and a hydrologist from Missoula. Officially, they were evaluating watershed continuity and wildlife migration access. Unofficially, they were confirming whether Mercer Valley qualified for protected acquisition status, which it absolutely did. We spent 4 hours riding fence lines and walking creek banks while Naomi took notes. At the northern ridge above Bitter Creek Estates, the hydrologist stopped beside an old spring runoff channel. You know this feeds directly into the subdivision aquifer basin? I know. He studied the terrain carefully. If this land gets protected status, future expansion permits around the recharge area become extremely difficult. Luke looked at me. I kept walking. That night around the fire pit, he finally asked the question he'd been holding for weeks. You already know they're trapped, don't you? I stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. Yes. Then why wait? Because timing mattered more than anger. Because every permit Vanessa filed, every development brochure Tessa distributed, every contractor invoice tied the HOA deeper to land they couldn't legally guarantee access to. They were building dependence, and dependence becomes leverage. Instead of saying all that, I handed Luke a folded document from my jacket pocket. He opened it slowly. Letter of Intent Red Elk Land and Water Conservancy. His eyes widened. This is real. Yes, you're actually doing it. Almost. The Conservancy had moved faster than even Naomi expected. Federal restoration grants were already pre-approved, pending final acreage transfer. Surveyors completed title verification in 22 days. Environmental reviews cleared in 31. Now the attorneys were finishing the final structure, 1,900 acres. Lake frontage, creek systems, timber corridors, and the only road into Bitter Creek Estates. Luke lowered the document carefully. When do they find out? When it's irreversible. That answer sat between us quietly. In town, rumors had already started spreading. People noticed the survey crews. They noticed environmental consultants visiting the ranch. Someone spotted Naomi's trucks parked outside Mara Quinn's office twice in 1 week. Vanessa definitely noticed. She came to the ranch personally 4 days later. No Range Rover this time. Black Land Cruiser, tinted windows. She stopped near the cattle guard while Luke and I repaired fence wire beside the pasture. You're avoiding my calls, she said immediately. I didn't realize we were friends. This situation is becoming expensive for everyone. Interesting wording. Not emotional. Financial. That meant pressure was building somewhere behind the scenes. Vanessa removed her sunglasses. Investors are asking questions. There it is. Her jaw tightened slightly. You've had surveyors all over the valley for weeks. What exactly are you planning? Luke looked at me sideways. I wiped dirt from my hands slowly before answering. Land management. That's not an answer anymore. It's still accurate. Vanessa stepped closer to the fence line. If you're trying to sabotage pending development around Bitter Creek Estates, your development? Our community? No. I corrected quietly. Those are different things. That hit harder than she expected. Because for the first time since this started, Vanessa looked uncertain. Not scared yet, but uncertain. Then her eyes shifted toward the ridge above Mercer Lake, where fresh orange survey flags still marked sections of timberland. What are they surveying for? I looked at the valley stretching behind her subdivision. The roads, the homes, the future expansion lots Tessa already sold brochures for, and all the land underneath them. Ownership, I said. Vanessa stared at me another long second before getting back into the SUV. But this time, when she drove away, she didn't speed. And, for the first time since, she tore down my grandfather's gate. Vanessa Holloway finally looked like a woman beginning to realize she might not understand the game she was playing anymore. The closing happened on a Thursday morning, quietly. No press, no ceremony, no dramatic speeches, just signatures. At 8:12 a.m., inside a conference room above a title office in Missoula, I signed 1,900 acres of Mercer Valley into the ownership of the Red Elk Land and Water Conservancy. Naomi sat across from me with two federal conservation attorneys reviewing final transfer language, while Mara Quinn checked the county recording confirmations on her laptop. Every parcel transferred clean, every survey verified, every water access corridor protected, and right in the middle of the final filing sat Mercer Road, the only legal entrance into Bitter Creek Estates. Mara slid the last document toward me. "You understand," she said quietly. "Once this records, there's no reversing it." "I know." Naomi signed next. Then the title officer stamped the final page. Done, just like that. Ownership changed. No courtroom battle. No shouting. Only paper. Funny how paper changes power faster than anger ever does. Luke met us outside, beside the parking lot. "It's official?" I handed him the recording receipt. He stared at it for several seconds before exhaling slowly. "Jesus, careful," I said. "Your mother hated when you used that word casually." That got a laugh out of him. Small one. Nervous. Because even Luke was beginning to understand how big this actually was. At 9:03 a.m., Sheriff Dale Rooker pulled into the parking lot beside a black SUV carrying two Conservancy legal representatives. One of them carried a thick envelope, the notice. Dale stepped out, adjusting his hat. "You sure you want me involved in this? You know the road situation better than anybody." "Yeah," he muttered. "That's exactly why this is going to explode." At 9:41 a.m., the convoy rolled through Bitter Creek Estates. Luke and I followed behind in my truck. Vanessa's house sat near the subdivision overlook above Mercer Lake. Massive windows, stone retaining walls, new landscaping she'd installed 6 months earlier after winning HOA president. Her black Range Rover was already in the driveway. Dale knocked first. No answer. Second knock. Still nothing. Then the front door finally swung open hard enough to hit the wall behind it. Vanessa stood there in workout clothes, holding a coffee mug, annoyed before she even saw me. Then she noticed Dale, then the legal representatives, then the envelope. "What is this?" Dale stayed professional. "Official service notification regarding property ownership and roadway access rights." Vanessa actually laughed. A real laugh. "Oh my God, Ethan! You filed another complaint?" "No." One of Naomi's attorneys stepped forward and handed her the packet. Vanessa skimmed the first page casually, then stopped. Her eyes moved back to the top. Red Elk Land and Water Conservancy, recorded property transfer. The color drained out of her face almost immediately. "This isn't real." "It's recorded with the county as of this morning," the attorney replied calmly. Vanessa flipped through the pages faster now. Parcel maps, transfer deeds, road boundaries, legal ownership descriptions. Her breathing changed by page 4. "No," she said again, quieter this time. "No, this road belongs to Bitter Creek Estates." "It does not," Mara answered. Vanessa looked at me directly. "You sold the ranch? Most of it. You can't do that." "I just did." She turned toward Dale desperately. "This affects emergency access, school routes, utilities. And that's why you're receiving formal notice today," Dale interrupted gently. 30 days. That's what the document gave the HOA. 30 days before all unrecorded roadway use rights terminated, unless a new legal agreement was negotiated with the Conservancy. Vanessa's hand actually started shaking. Behind her, I noticed Tessa appear in the hallway wearing a half-buttoned shirt and holding his phone. "What's happening?" Vanessa shoved the paperwork toward him. He read 2 pages before going completely silent. That silence told me more than anything else could have. Because, unlike Vanessa, Tessa understood legal liability immediately, and he knew exactly how many development investors were now standing on air. You sold the access road, he said quietly. No, Naomi's attorney corrected. Mr. Mercer sold the land containing the access road. Big difference. One sounded emotional, the other sounded permanent. Vanessa stepped out onto the porch now, voice rising. You planned this? Yes. You waited this entire time? Yes. You let us keep building. That wasn't my decision. For a second, nobody spoke. Then somewhere farther down the subdivision road, a news van turned the corner. Fast. Another one followed behind it. Vanessa saw them too. Her expression shifted from panic to disbelief. How does the media already know? Naomi's attorney answered calmly. Public land transfers become available very quickly once recorded. That wasn't the whole truth. The Conservancy press office had released the announcement 20 minutes earlier. By noon, every major county station would have it. Luke leaned beside my truck, quietly watching the cameras approach. You timed this down to the minute, didn't you? More or less. Vanessa stared at me like she was seeing a different person than the rancher she thought she'd been bullying for weeks. Not angry, not emotional, just patient. And finally, for the first time since this started, Vanessa Holloway understood. She was no longer fighting over a road. She was standing on land controlled by people she had absolutely no power over anymore. By sunset, Bitter Creek Estates looked like a neighborhood waiting for a wildfire evacuation order. Residents gathered in driveways, staring at phones while news vans parked beside the stone Holloway Pass Parkway sign. Vanessa installed 6 weeks earlier. Reporters walked door to door asking homeowners if they knew their subdivision had been built without guaranteed legal access rights. Most of them genuinely didn't, and that was the beginning of Vanessa's real problem. Because fear spreads faster than anger when mortgages are involved. At 7 that evening, the HOA clubhouse overflowed with residents. Luke and I stayed outside, near the parking lot, while people poured through the doors, carrying printouts of online articles and screenshots from local news stations. One headline read, "Luxury Montana Hoe May Lose, Only Access Road After Land Transfer." Another, "Conservation Trust Now Controls Private Subdivision Entry Inside." Voices were already rising. Then Vanessa started shouting. Even through the clubhouse walls, I could hear her trying to regain control. "This is intimidation," she yelled. "This is retaliation by a bitter landowner." That line might worked 2 weeks earlier. Not now. Because too many people had started asking practical questions. School bus routes, emergency response times, insurance liabilities, future resale values, and most importantly, why the HOA board never secured permanent access rights before expanding the subdivision. That answer belonged to Vanessa and Tessa. Around 8:15, the clubhouse doors burst open and an older man stepped outside breathing hard. Harold Bennett, retired Army engineer, one of the original Bitter Creek residents. Quiet man, lived alone near the upper ridge. He spotted me near the truck immediately. "You knew," he said. I didn't answer. "You knew this whole thing could collapse." "I knew the road belonged to me." Harold rubbed both hands across his face slowly. Inside the clubhouse, another wave of shouting erupted. Then Vanessa's voice again. "She sold this community a fantasy," Harold muttered quietly. "Jesus Christ, that caught my attention." "Sold?" Harold looked back toward the building. "Tessa's development company promised future expansion lots using guaranteed permanent access roads." He shook his head once. "There's at least 14 pending property contracts tied to that language." That explained the panic. Not just homeowners, investors, developers, banks. Every one of them suddenly realized access rights were built on assumptions instead of recorded ownership. Harold looked at me carefully. "Did you plan this before she tore down the gate?" "No. But after?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Can't say I blame you. That was important. Because once people stop arguing morality and start understanding consequences, power shifts." The clubhouse doors opened again. This time Vanessa came out. Her makeup was smeared slightly around the eyes. Phone pressed against one ear. Tessa, right behind her, looking furious. She spotted me immediately. You did this intentionally. Yes, you sabotaged the entire subdivision. No, I answered calmly. I sold my land. That road is critical infrastructure. Then somebody should have purchased it legally. Her face tightened hard enough I thought she might actually lose control for the first time. Instead, she pointed toward me while several residents watched from the entrance. You think the Conservancy can just trap 92 families? Before I could answer, another voice interrupted. No one's trapping anybody. Naomi Red Elk walked across the parking lot carrying a leather folder beneath one arm. Two Conservancy attorneys followed behind her. Vanessa turned immediately. You. Naomi ignored the hostility completely. The Conservancy is prepared to negotiate a lawful access agreement. Several residents nearby went silent instantly. Hope does that to people. Vanessa crossed her arms. Under what conditions? Naomi opened the folder. Environmental restoration standards along Mercer Creek. Annual land use compensation. Formal maintenance oversight. Restrictions on future subdivision expansion near protected watershed areas. Tessa stepped forward sharply. You're trying to extort homeowners. No, Naomi replied evenly. We're protecting land your board attempted to claim without ownership. Big difference, and everyone standing there understood it. Harold Bennett definitely did. He looked directly at Vanessa. Did you know the road wasn't legally ours? Vanessa hesitated. Tiny hesitation, but deadly, because the room behind her had gone completely quiet waiting for the answer. Tessa answered first. Our attorneys believed long-term community use established legal standing. That's not what I asked, Harold snapped. More residents started stepping outside now, watching, listening. One woman near the doorway called out, Did the board know there wasn't a recorded easement? Nobody answered immediately, and silence answered louder than words ever could. Vanessa tried one last pivot. We're filing federal action Monday morning. Naomi nodded once. You're free to do that. Calm, steady, completely unshaken. That frightened Vanessa more than anger would have, because people only stay that calm when they know the paperwork favors them. As Naomi handed Harold a preliminary copy of the proposed access agreement, rain finally started falling across the parking lot. Cold, fast, loud against the clubhouse roof. Nobody moved. Not even Vanessa, because standing there beside the glowing Holloway Pass Parkway sign, the residents of Bitter Creek Estates were finally starting to realize the most dangerous thing Ethan Mercer had done wasn't selling the road. It was waiting until they depended on it first. 3 days later, the county community hall hit fire code capacity before the public hearing even started. News crews lined the walls beside ranchers, homeowners, county officials, and half the real estate brokers in western Montana. Somebody dragged extra folding chairs in from the volunteer fire station next door. But it still wasn't enough. People stood shoulder to shoulder near the exits, because everybody understood the same thing now. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It was a financial collapse unfolding in public. Luke sat beside me near the back row while Mara Quinn organized binders at the front table, with Naomi Red Elk and the Conservancy attorneys. Across the aisle, Vanessa Holloway entered 20 minutes late, wearing a dark blazer and carrying a stack of legal folders thick enough to impress people who didn't understand courtrooms. Tessa followed behind her, looking exhausted. Neither of them made eye contact with anyone. That told me more than their lawyers ever could. County Commissioner Bill Avery opened the hearing with visible discomfort. Today's session concerns roadway access claims, land transfer impacts, and associated subdivision development disputes involving Bitter Creek Estates. Polite government language for everything just exploded. Vanessa's attorney spoke first. Predictable arguments, community reliance, public safety, historical use, infrastructure dependence. He spent nearly 20 minutes describing Mercer Road as essential public access infrastructure relied upon in good faith by subdivision residents. Then Mara stood up, and the room changed immediately. She carried only one thin folder to the podium. That argument, she began calmly, would matter significantly more if Bitter Creek Estates had ever legally purchased access rights. No wasted motion, no raised voice, just facts. She held up the first document. January 2012. Courtesy access payment, signed by the original HOA board. Then another. By the sixth document, people in the audience were already whispering. By the 10th, Vanessa stopped writing notes, because every payment destroyed the HOA's central legal claim. Permissive use, not hostile possession, no prescriptive easement, no ownership. Mara laid the final stack on the table. 14 consecutive years of signed acknowledgement that Mercer Road remained private property owned by Ethan Mercer. Vanessa's attorney tried interrupting. Mara didn't even look at him. In fact, she continued, the HOA continued issuing these payments while simultaneously marketing future development based on access rights they had never legally secured. That hit harder, because now the issue wasn't confusion. It was negligence. Harold Bennett stood up from the audience before the commissioner even called for comments. I served in Army engineering for 28 years, he said. And I'd like to know why our HOA board spent subdivision funds expanding a road they knew we didn't legally own. Dead silence. Vanessa grabbed the microphone immediately. We acted under legal guidance. You acted like owners, Harold cut in sharply, without buying the land. Applause broke out near the back rows. Commissioner Avery slammed his gavel once. Order. But the mood had shifted already. People weren't scared anymore. They were angry. At Vanessa. Naomi stepped forward next. Unlike the attorneys, she brought maps. Large watershed maps. Aquifer overlays. Protected creek diagrams. She pinned one beside the podium wall. This, she said evenly, is the Mercer Valley Recharge Basin feeding groundwater into Bitter Creek Estates. Red highlighted lines spread directly beneath the subdivision. Then, farther uphill, across conservancy land, the room went still. Naomi pointed to the northern ridge. Future subdivisions expansion plans, submitted by Holloway Development, overlap protected watershed territory, now controlled under federal conservation agreements. Tessa finally spoke for the first time. That protection wasn't active during lot planning. It is now, Naomi answered. Another silence, longer this time, because suddenly this wasn't only about a road anymore. It was future property value, future construction permits, future water access, everything. Vanessa looked around the room and realized nobody was standing with her anymore. Not even her own residents. A woman near the second row stood up holding a printed development brochure. This says guaranteed permanent mountain access, she said. Was that a lie? Tessa tried answering carefully. At the time we believed. Was it true? He couldn't say yes. That was enough. The room erupted. Questions flew from every direction. Mortgage disclosures, insurance liabilities, HOA spending records, pending lot sales. Commissioner Avery called for order twice before Sheriff Dale Rooker finally stepped beside the stage to calm things down. And through all of it, Vanessa kept staring at me. Not furious anymore. Not arrogant. Just stunned. Like she still couldn't understand how the quiet rancher she mocked at the auction had dismantled everything without ever raising his voice. Then Harold Bennett stood one final time. As of this morning, he announced, I've submitted formal emergency motions for removal of Vanessa Holloway as HOA president pending financial review of subdivision liabilities. Nobody defended her. Not one person. Vanessa slowly lowered herself back into her chair while camera flashes burst across the room. And somewhere behind her, through the tall community hall windows, the giant stone Holloway Pass Parkway sign stood beside the road, she never actually owned, looking suddenly very temporary. 30 days later, it was gone. I watched them haul it away at sunrise. Tessa Holloway drove the flatbed himself. No contractors this time, no ceremony, no social media cameras. Just steel chains wrapped around the base of a monument that had cost nearly $40,000 to install and less than 10 minutes to remove. Luke stood beside me near the fence line while the crane lifted the stone sign off its concrete footing. "You think that hurts him?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "I think the invoices hurt him." That part had turned ugly fast. Once Bitter Creek residents realized how much legal exposure the HOA board created, attorneys started circling like hawks. Failed disclosures, improper development claims, unauthorized infrastructure spending, pending lot contracts built around access guarantees that legally never existed. By the second week after the hearing, Vanessa resigned as HOA president. By the third, homeowners filed a collective civil complaint against both Holloway Development and the former AA board for financial damages tied to the road expansion project. Mara called it predictable consequences. Luke called it karma. Meanwhile, the Conservancy finalized the new road use agreement with the subdivision. Not revenge, structure that mattered to Naomi. Bitter Creek Estates would retain legal access through Mercer Road under a renewable 30-year land use license. The HOA would fund annual environmental restoration work around Mercer Creek and can contribute conservation payments directly into protected watershed maintenance. Future subdivision expansion beyond existing lots blocked. The recharge basin above the valley was now federally protected conservation territory. No more ridge developments. No more luxury expansion brochures. No more pretending the valley existed purely to increase property values. Harold Bennett signed the final agreement on behalf of the interim HOA board. Vanessa never attended the meeting, neither did Tessa. 3 days after the paperwork closed, a new wooden sign appeared beside the road entrance. Simple cedar, hand-carved. Mercer Valley Conservation Corridor access granted by agreement. No gold lettering, no branding, no ego, just truth. The first time I drove past it, I stopped the truck and sat there for almost a full minute. Funny thing about silence. Once conflict finally leaves a place, you realize how loud tension had become. The ranch changed quickly after that. Survey crews became restoration crews. The old construction scars beside the creek disappeared beneath fresh grading and erosion control fencing. Naomi's environmental teams planted willow cuttings along the water banks, while volunteers repaired damaged pasture fencing the HOA contractors tore through during the road expansion. And the cattle finally stopped spooking every time trucks rolled uphill. Luke stayed longer than planned. At first, he claimed he was only helping repair fences before returning to Wyoming. Then he started helping Naomi's crews map wildlife corridors. Then he started attending Conservancy planning meetings. One evening, I found him sitting on the porch beside Naomi, laughing over old topographic maps spread across the table. Claire would have loved that sight, not because of romance, because she always believed Luke belonged closer to this land than he admitted. Late October brought the first elk herd back through the western ridge. I saw them crossing near the old Cedar Gate site just before dusk. 23 head moving quietly through grass that hadn't seen that kind of movement in years. The widened shoulder where Vanessa's contractors buried the county marker had already been restored. Mara made sure of that. The Conservancy uncovered the original iron boundary pin during restoration work and reset it in fresh concrete, exactly where my father helped place it decades earlier. I stood there with Naomi the afternoon they finished. She brushed dirt from her gloves and looked toward the valley. "You know," she said, "most people would have gone to war over this. I did." "No," she replied softly. "You went to paperwork." That made me laugh harder than I expected because she was right. The whole thing ended the same way it truly began. Ownership, not shouting, not threats, not intimidation. Paper. By winter, Bitter Creek estates looked different. Quieter, more careful. People waved again while driving through the road. The new HOA board removed every remaining Holloway development sign from the subdivision entrance. Harold personally mailed me copies of the revised community bylaws acknowledging permanent conservancy land protections and roadway licensing obligations. Attached was a handwritten note. You were right to protect the valley. I'm sorry we forgot whose land we lived beside. I kept that note. A few weeks later, Luke and I rebuilt the cedar gate. Not the same design, couldn't be. My grandfather's gate was gone, but we used reclaimed timber from the original posts wherever we could salvage it. Luke carved Claire's initials into the inside beam where only family would notice. The final hinge went on just before sunset. I stepped back beside the fence while wind moved across Mercer Lake below us. For the first time in months, there were no construction engines, no legal threats, no survey flags, just open land breathing normally again. Luke leaned against the new post. So what happens now? I looked down the long gravel road cutting through the valley. The road Vanessa Holloway thought gave her power. The road that nearly destroyed her, and the land underneath it that outlasted all of us. Now, I said quietly, now the valley remembers who it belongs to.
And maybe that's a real lesson in all of this: lands, roads, fences, or even communities. They only stay strong when people respect the truth underneath them. It never won because he shouted louder, threatened people, or tried to humiliate anybody. He won because he kept records, stayed patient, and understood that ownership carries responsibility, not just power. A lot of folks these days confuse control with stewardship, but the people who truly care about a place usually aren't the loudest people in the room. They're the ones fixing fences after dark, protecting water nobody else noticed, and thinking about what gets left behind 20 years from now. In the end, the roads stay open, families still got home, the land got protected, and maybe that's the best kind of outcome. There is not destruction, but correction. Now I'm curious about you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA property dispute or a situation when somebody thought they owned more than they really did? Drop a yes in the comments if you would stood your ground like Ethan did, or share your own story down below. I read more of these comments than you probably think. And if stories like this remind you of the kind of quiet strength this country was built on, subscribe and come back next week for another story from the back roads, ranch gates, and small towns where space still matters.